Okay, so I've had a few people ask me about these types of texts that they may ask you to write in the exam, and this could be at level 1 or level 2. Although so far I've only seen blogs as a task, as a writing task at level 2. So I'm just going to quickly go through this, and I'm going to talk about the layout and language that you might use in these three different types of texts. And then I'm just going to give you an example of what this means in practice. Okay? So first off, a report layout. It makes sense. A report, don't forget, is written to inform. You're not selling anything. You're not, well, you are describing stuff sometimes, but the focus isn't describing stuff. The focus is on informing whoever asked you to write the report what the state of play is. So it makes sense. It's divided into categories with subheadings depending on what you're reporting on. So, for instance, if you're asked to report on a project or something like that, you might divide it into advantages and disadvantages, etc., etc. You're going to need a title and a date, and you are probably going to end with a conclusion or recommendations, and you may well use things like bullet points here as well. Now, in terms of language, a report is formal and it is objective. And what that means is you're basing this on facts. Your opinion doesn't really come into it unless you're reporting on something that is subjective. So, for instance, one of the practice tasks asks you to write a report on like an undercover shopper report on a clothing store. And some of that is going to be subjective, you know. You might sort of need to make comments on the behaviour of the staff, for instance. But it is still very much informed by facts. Okay? And again, even if you're making that subjective judgment that, I don't know, the staff were very polite and, well-mannered, you'd probably want some evidence to back that up. You know, you'd say something like, the staff were very polite and well-mannered. John approached me and quietly asked, sort of like I gave him plenty of space and asked if I wanted any assistance. When I said no, he returned to his till with a smile. You'd want to base that judgment you made on facts. And you avoid referring to yourself in this. Okay? Again, unless we're talking about the example I was just talking about where, the purpose of the report is to talk about your experiences when you went there, you don't tend to use I, as much. Now, articles, they'll usually specify, in fact, they'll always specify what sort of publication you're writing for. So you do need, as with the report and as with the blog, you need to think about your audience and your purpose. So there's a difference, for instance, in how you might write an article for a college newsletter compared to how you might write an article for a broadsheet newspaper. You're going to have a title and author's name or date at a bare minimum. Usually the articles have images, but don't waste your time on doing this in the exam. You do not have the time to draw. You are going to have an introductory paragraph, and in that introductory paragraph you sum up the article, and then you have a conclusion, and again you sum up that article. Some people prefer to go back and complete their introductory paragraph if they're writing an article, purely because as they're writing, their plan might change. They might focus on something else. And as the introduction is that summary of everything you put in the article, if you write it first and then it turns out you don't actually include a point, you've kind of written yourself into a bit of a corner there. Now, depending on the article, depending on the audience, your tone might be quite formal and sort of like informal and chatty, if it's a student magazine, for instance, as opposed to fairly formal if we're talking about a broadsheet paper. Now, if it's a persuasive article, if you're being asked to give your opinion, which most of these tasks are, you're probably going to include rhetorical questions. They are especially prevalent in opinion pieces in newspapers. Have a look through. If you don't believe me, you'll see them. Rhetorical questions are also brilliant when it comes to articles because you can sort of lay it out. You can start each point, each paragraph, and start with a rhetorical question you answer in that paragraph. That's a fantastic way to lay out an article where you're giving your opinion. Articles, compared to blogs, tend to be a bit more general, and they're a bit less focused on the writer than a blog is. Now, a blog, you've got a blog is a bit more personal. It looks very similar to an article, but the way a blog is written and it's the author of the blog, not so much the publication, because it's not in a newspaper, it's just on somebody's page or something like that. So it tends to be more personal. So that opening paragraph of a blog is going to be talking. It's going to be probably you talking about your experiences on whatever the topic is, and it may well, the task itself may ask you to essentially just write a blog about your experiences with this topic. It's a lot more focused on you. It's more conversational. That means so there's more reference to yourself than the other texts. Now, as for the language itself, that is going to obviously differ by audience and purpose, though. So, if you're being asked to write a blog for company news, sort of company website or something, it's probably going to be more professional and formal than if you're asked to write a blog about the time you redecorated your kitchen. So, what I want to look at now is some example questions that they may give. Right, so here we are. Now, these do bear in mind, they're unlikely to ask you to write something about this. I've picked this topic and I've picked the way I phrase these questions purely for ease of reading, really. So you guys at home can sort of work with this. So we've got 3 here on the same topic. So write a blog post about cafes in your local high street and how it's changed over the years. Or you've got a report here where you work for a chain of high street cafes, and you're writing a report to your manager, or you could work for the local paper and there might be plans to renovate the high street, which requires demolishing a popular cafe, so you're writing an article giving your opinion on this. Now, the thing we do straight off the bat for each of these is we use SLAP, situation, layout, audience, and purpose. So, if you want, pause the video, have a go, put together SLAP for each of these, and then play. Okay, so yeah, as we can see here, and hopefully yours will be somewhat similar. So for the blog post, the situation is how the cafes in the town have changed. So we know the layout, it's going to need that title, intro, where you throw it yourself. Everything we've talked about in terms of layout, but also your audience is going to be your readers. So in this case, chatty and informal, and it's descriptive. So plenty of adjectives, and as I'm writing about that change, probably some comparisons too. So all of this, even though these 3 tasks are on broadly the same topic, cafes, we're gonna wind up with 3 very different documents. Because the report here, I'm saying, well, it's an undercover inspection of the cafe, so I'm going to be using subheadings here. Maybe I could divide it into introduction, food and drink, cleanliness, customer service, and then finally conclusion. I'm going to be formal and professional as well here, aren't I? Plenty of evidence and facts as well, and any time I give my opinion, I back it up with evidence. And finally, the local paper, well, it's persuasive. I know the purpose is going to be persuasive, so I'm going to be including rhetorical questions. The cafe itself is to be demolished, and that's controversial, and my opinion here is going to be to save the cafe. And the article, the introduction paragraph, where I sum everything up, and the title, author's name, and date. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to have a go at writing the opening paragraph for each of these. Okay, so I'm not going to worry about putting the title down or anything like that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put down the opening paragraph for each of these things. And then we'll have a look at them side by side. So you might want to have a go at this yourself. If so, do pause the video and see how it compares. Right, so here we go. Paragraph 1, obviously, is the first task, which is the blog. Paragraph 2, the report, the introduction to the report. And paragraph 3 is the introduction to the article. And hopefully you can see here how, even though you've got the same topic, the way it's written, the focus of what's being written about changes radically. So again, as I said, with the blog, we've got that direct opening. You're talking about your experiences, and that continues throughout. Okay? So we start by describing the Sid's Ice Cream Parlour place here. Plenty of descriptive language put in. And the entire thing, I would have continued this blog basically referencing myself and my experiences throughout, because that tends to be what they expect you to do in blogs. Blogs tend to be more personal and about that relationship between the reader and the writer directly. You'll also notice the tone here is very chatty, it's informal. That obviously could potentially shift if we're doing a workplace blog, as I suggested. If we have a look, and feel free to pause at any time and read through these, if we have a look at the second one here, this is taken from an introduction to a report. And in the introduction of a report, all I'm doing really is I am just going over why this report has been written and any of the details. So I'm talking about it being a routine undercover report. I'm giving the location, so it's any town branch of Sid's Ice Cream Parlour. when it was conducted, so slightly before peak hours on Saturday the 18th, and what was assessed. So quality of food, drink, cleanliness of the premises and customer service were all assessed. So that's what I'm doing, and you can see the clear difference there between the first and the second paragraph and the third paragraph. That report is literally only interested in the facts. It may get onto more subjective stuff when I start talking about how I felt about the customer service, or the quality of the food and the drink, or the cleanliness, but that is all going to be based on concrete facts. And again, no reference to myself here at all. And here's the article. And if you recall, that article was written about the plans to renovate the high street that involved demolishing a much-loved cafe, and we're back to Sid's Ice Cream Parlour. You can see here I've started with a nice little rhetorical question, and I'm including the audience here as well. I want to get them on side. And again, this isn't something that you necessarily have to do every time you write an article, but when I looked at what I was being asked to write, I thought, okay, so I'm sort of drumming up support in a local community to stop this place getting knocked down. Well, I'm definitely going to want to talk to the readers. I'm going to want them on side from the word go, which is why my introduction starts with this nice rhetorical question here. And I'm going on to talk about it. I'm being quite descriptive, and you can see there's some overlap here with the blog. Key difference, I think, is that there's very little about me. The focus here is pretty much purely on Sid's Ice Cream, okay, on the reader. Whereas in the blog, it's very much about the writer's experience here. You'll also notice that I've cleverly, I did tell you how I was going to do this right at the start, but I have included the points I want to cover. When I write my article, I am going to cover fond memories we all have of Sid's Ice Cream. I'm then going to talk about the fact that the local council isn't considering the history and culture of the town. And then I'm probably going to be moving on to talk about the new and improved access points to the high street and why that's a bad idea. So I am summing up in my introduction everything I'm going to then talk about in that article. And that is, broadly speaking, the key differences between those three texts. So just as a quick reminder, reports, articles, and blogs.